Matthew, a young black waiter, endured a humiliating outburst from his manager, igniting a storm of outrage that revealed the systemic prejudice lurking beneath the surface. As whispers turned into a viral movement, Matthew's quiet resilience became a symbol of resistance, leading to a shocking turn of events. What happened next would surprise even the most jaded. But let's start from the beginning. The morning at Savannah's cafe was alive with energy. The clatter of dishes being stacked and wiped clean blended with the hissing of the espresso machine, while the air was thick with the inviting scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. Rays of sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting golden patches on the polished wooden floor. The place hummed with the quiet buzz of conversations, diners chatting over steaming cups of cappuccino, the occasional laugh punctuating the rhythmic murmur. Matthew moved seamlessly through the tables, balancing trays with practiced ease and offering quick, warm smiles that seemed to brighten even the busiest corners of the cafe. At 26, he had become a fixture of Savannah's, his reputation for remembering regulars' orders and his effortless charm making him a favorite among customers. Whether it was greeting someone with their name or a kind inquiry about their family, he had a way of making everyone feel seen. He carried himself with a natural grace, weaving between tables with a calm focus that masked the pressure of the fast-paced environment. His white shirt and black apron were spotless, his demeanor calm even when the cafe reached peak rush hour. Yet behind the scenes the staff whispered about the tightrope Matthew walked every shift under the scrutiny of Mark Lawson, the manager. Mark was in his mid-40s, his crisp dress shirts always paired with a permanent scowl. Known for his outbursts, he kept his team on edge, his sharp critiques often cutting into the heart of even the most seasoned employees. That morning, Matthew was delivering a breakfast plate to Mr. Carmichael, one of the cafe's loyal customers. The plate was meticulously arranged, a golden brown waffle dusted with powdered sugar, fresh berries, and a small pitcher of maple syrup. But as Matthew set it down, his sharp eye caught a faint, almost imperceptible smudge on the plate's edge. "I'll get that replaced for you," Matthew began to say, but Mr. Carmichael, with a friendly chuckle, dismissed it. "No worries, young man. It's nothing, really." Unfortunately, Mark overheard the exchange from the counter. His head snapped up, and his face darkened as if he had been waiting for just such an opportunity. Without hesitation, he stormed out of his office, his shoes clacking sharply against the tiled floor. "Matthew!" Mark's voice boomed, slicing through the cafe's lively hum. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, heads turning toward the commotion. Matthew froze, plate still in hand, his heart sinking as Mark closed the distance between them with an air of authority that made it impossible to ignore him. "Is this what you call service?" Mark snapped, snatching the plate from Matthew's hands and holding it up for everyone to see. "Do you even care about the standards we're trying to uphold here? Look at this!" The entire cafe fell silent. Some customers avoided looking directly at the scene, feigning interest in their coffee cups, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The other staff members ducked their heads, suddenly engrossed in their tasks, unwilling to attract Mark's ire. Matthew, caught off guard, began to open his mouth to explain, but Mark didn't give him the chance. "You've been slipping up too much lately," Mark continued, his voice laced with disdain. "Maybe this job's too much for you. Perhaps flipping burgers is more your speed." The words hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. Matthew's cheeks burned as he felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. The sting of Mark's words was sharper than the accusation itself. It was the assumption that his worth was tied to this one moment. Yet Matthew refused to let his composure crack. He stood tall, his face calm despite the whirlwind of emotion brewing beneath the surface. "I'll take care of it, sir," he said simply, his voice steady, before retrieving the plate and walking back toward the kitchen. The cafe remained eerily quiet, the tension lingering long after Mark had returned to his office. But as Matthew stepped behind the counter, out of view, he allowed himself one deep breath, steadying his resolve. He knew better than to let Mark's words define him. This wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. Later that evening, as the cafe staff gathered for the nightly cleanup, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. The rhythmic swiping of rags on tables and the quiet clinking of dishes seemed louder than usual, filling the silence left by the morning's incident. Matthew, stationed at the counter, diligently polished the silverware, his usual ease and energy dimmed. His colleagues exchanged glances, their unspoken solidarity hovering in the background, but no one dared to address the elephant in the room, except Sarah. She approached him cautiously, her sneakers squeaking on the recently mopped floor. "Matthew," she began, her voice low but resolute. He glanced up, meeting her concerned gaze. "Why do you let him talk to you like that? You're one of the best workers here." Matthew exhaled slowly, setting a fork down with deliberate care. His faint smile carried a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "Sarah, it's not worth the fight," he said quietly, leaning back against the counter. "Mark's the kind of guy who thrives on putting people down. If I push back, it'll just make things worse." "But you don't deserve it," she said, her voice edged with frustration. "You're out here holding this place together, and he talks to you like you're nothing. It's not right." Matthew gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "Sarah, it's not just about Mark," he replied, his tone growing thoughtful. "I've been fighting battles like this my whole life. If I let every slight or insult knock me down, I'd never make it anywhere. I've got bigger plans than this job, and letting him get under my skin isn't going to help me get there." Sarah frowned, clearly unsatisfied with his response, but unable to argue against his resolve. "Well," she said after a pause, "just know you're not alone. If you ever need someone to back you up, I've got your back." Matthew's smile grew a little warmer. "Thanks, Sarah. I mean that." Unbeknownst to him, the morning's confrontation had left more than just the staff shaken. Mr. Carmichael, one of the cafe's regulars, had been sitting nearby during the exchange. A retired journalist with a keen sense of injustice, he'd been disturbed by the blatant humiliation Matthew endured. That evening, as he sat at his desk, the scene replayed in his mind. Matthew's quiet grace in the face of such unfairness struck a chord. Unable to let it go, Carmichael took to Twitter, typing out a post that would send shockwaves through the local community. "Witnessed something troubling today at Savannah's cafe. A hard-working young waiter was publicly humiliated by his manager over something trivial. Matthew deserves better. This kind of treatment has no place anywhere. Hashtag justice for Matthew." Within hours, the tweet began to pick up traction. Likes turned into retweets, retweets into replies, and by morning, #Justice for Matthew was trending locally. Conversations about workplace treatment and systemic inequity swirled online, centering Matthew as a symbol of quiet perseverance in the face of adversity. By the time the cafe opened the next day, Matthew's world had unknowingly shifted. When Matthew arrived at work the next day, the atmosphere was charged. Unbeknownst to him, the cafe's corporate headquarters had seen the viral post and dispatched a team to investigate. Midway through his shift, 2 corporate representatives entered the cafe. They requested to speak with Mark and Matthew. Mark initially seemed unfazed, assuming the visit was routine, but as the meeting unfolded, his confidence began to falter. The corporate reps asked Matthew about his experience working at the cafe. At first hesitant, Matthew recounted his dedication to the job and the recurring moments of humiliation he endured. He spoke with calm professionalism, focusing on the facts. Then came the bombshell. One of the representatives turned to Mark and said, "Matthew has been part of our employee leadership development program for the past 6 months. We've been evaluating him for a managerial role." Mark's face turned pale. The very employee he had belittled was not only excelling, but was being groomed for a position equal to or higher than his own. The following week, the staff was informed that Mark had been suspended pending a full review of his conduct. For Matthew, the transition was surreal. He had spent months quietly proving himself, never imagining the spotlight would turn on him in such a dramatic way. On his first day as interim manager, Matthew stood in front of the staff during the morning meeting. Some looked at him with pride, others with newfound respect. Matthew cleared his throat, his voice steady. "I want to thank everyone who supported me, even when things weren't easy. My goal here isn't just to maintain the cafe's reputation, but to create a workplace where we all feel valued. Later that day, as Mark packed up his belongings, Matthew approached him. "I want you to know," he said calmly, "that I didn't take this job to spite you, but I hope this experience gives you something to reflect on." Mark didn't reply. He simply nodded, his face a mixture of anger and shame, and walked out. Under Matthew's leadership, the cafe became a haven for both customers and staff, a place where hard work was recognized and kindness was the standard. And as for Matthew, he knew that this victory was just one step in a much larger journey toward breaking barriers.